6 years ago, Lady Beatrice Hartfield stood up in the middle of her own engagement announcement at the Duchess of Sutherland's ball and called off her arranged marriage to the Duke of Northwood in front of 300 witnesses. She called him cold. She called him grasping. She called him a man who needed her family's money more than he would ever need her. He left London the next morning. He has not spoken her name since. Tonight, January the 17th, 1814. His carriage has broken down in a Yorkshire blizzard. The only inhabited house within 15 miles is Hartfield Hall. The only person inside it is the woman who ruined his name 6 years ago. She has been alone in this house since her father died 11 weeks ago. She has been waiting, in some private way she will not name even to herself, for him to come. She did not expect him tonight. She did not expect him like this. Duke, through gritted teeth, snow on his coat. Lady Hartfield, Beatrice, quiet, perfectly composed. Your Grace, come inside before you freeze. She did not say welcome. He did not say thank you. The blizzard, when it arrived in earnest 2 hours later, would last 3 days. Every great house has its secrets. Every duchess was once a woman the world refused to see. And every love worth telling begins the moment someone breaks the rules. The hall of Hartfield Hall was cold. It had been cold for 11 weeks. Beatrice had let 3 of the fires go out after her father's funeral, kept only 2 burning, the one in her bedroom and the one in the small front parlor where she ate her meals alone. The rest of the house was shut up, holland covers on the furniture, shutters drawn. A house in mourning, kept by a woman who had not yet decided whether she was going to keep living in it. Now there was a duke in the entrance hall. He had not removed his coat. He was looking at the staircase as if it had personally offended him. She set the candelabra down on the console table. She said, "The west wing is closed. The east wing is closed. I can offer you the front parlor and the small bedroom above it. You may have hot water and a meal in an hour. Your horse can go to the south stable. There is no groom, but the door is open. I will not, Your Grace, I will not apologize for the conditions. You are welcome to ride back into the storm if they do not suit you." He turned his head. He looked at her properly for the first time in 6 years. His face did not move. She had forgotten, in 6 years, how still he could stand, how a man could remain absolutely silent and still occupy the entire room. He said, "I will take the parlor." She nodded once. He said, "Lady Hartfield, Your Grace, I am sorry for the intrusion." "You are not." He blinked. She said, "If you were sorry, you would have ridden to the inn at Helmsley. It is 11 miles. You knew which house you had stopped at. You came here on purpose because you knew I was alone. Do not apologize for things you intended." She picked up the candelabra. She walked toward the parlor without looking back to see whether he followed. He followed. The parlor was warmer. Beatrice lit 2 more candles from the candelabra. She placed one on the mantel, one on the small writing desk by the window. The room came up around them in pools of warm gold. The Duke had not sat down. He stood near the fire, his coat still on. Snow melting on his boots, his gloves still on his hands. She said, "Take off the coat, Your Grace. You will catch cold standing in wet wool." He did not move. She said, "If you would rather freeze than accept hospitality from me, I will not stop you. But I will not have the parlor rug ruined for the sake of your pride. Take off the coat." A small muscle moved in his jaw. He took off the coat. She crossed to him and held out her hand for it. He gave it to her. She walked it to the back of a chair near the fire. She arranged it carefully. She turned back. She said, "I will bring tea in 20 minutes. The kitchen is 2 corridors away. The cook left in November. I am the only person in the house. I would appreciate it if you did not pretend otherwise." He said, "There is no one here at all?" "Mrs. Pickering comes in twice a week from the village. She was here this morning. She will not come back until Friday. The blizzard will see to that." "You have been alone here for 11 weeks. Beatrice. It was the first time he had said her name. She had not heard him say it in 6 years. She turned her face away and adjusted a candle on the mantel that did not need adjusting. She said, "I am going to make tea, Your Grace. I will return in 20 minutes. Please do not freeze to death in the meanwhile. I have only just buried one man this winter. I do not have the strength for another." She walked out. She closed the door behind her. She stood in the cold corridor for 30 seconds, with her hand flat against the wood, her eyes closed, breathing the way her father had taught her to breathe before riding a difficult horse. Then she went to make the tea. What I am about to tell you is the story of 3 days. 3 days in a snowed-in house in Yorkshire. 3 days between a woman who had been called a liar by all of London for 6 years and the man who had been the one calling her that. 3 days that ended with him on his knees in the front hall of Hartfield Hall, and her telling him a thing she had not told anyone since she was 22 years old. I am going to tell you what she said. I am going to tell you why she ruined her own name to save his. I am going to tell you what he did when he finally understood. If you want to hear it, and trust me, you want to hear it, stay with me. Subscribe so you do not miss the next story. We tell a new one every 2 days. Slowly, beautifully, without apology. And in the comments, before you go further, tell me one thing. Have you ever been the person the room got wrong? The one who carried the truth because telling it would have cost too much? Beatrice did, for 6 years. Let me tell you what it cost her. She brought the tea. She had also brought, on a small wooden tray, a plate of bread and cold mutton and a wedge of hard cheese from the larder. She set it on the tea table between them. She poured for him, without asking how he took it. Black, no sugar, she remembered, and she poured for herself. He had washed his face. His hair was damp. His cravat was off. His throat was bare. He looked in the firelight, less severe than he had in the hall, tireder, more human. He said, "Thank you." She said, "Eat. You have ridden through a storm. Your hands are still shaking." He looked down at his hands. They were shaking. He picked up the tea. He drank it. He set it down. He said, "Lady Hartfield, Your Grace, I owe you an explanation." "You owe me nothing, Your Grace. We made our positions to each other 6 years ago. I have not forgotten them. I do not expect you to have forgotten them. I would prefer, for the duration of this storm, that we agreed not to perform either civility or hostility, and simply allowed each other to survive the weather. I am quite tired tonight. I do not have the strength for either gratitude or scorn." He looked at her a long moment. He said, "You have got thinner." "I have buried my father, Your Grace. People often get thinner. Eat your bread." He ate his bread. She watched him eat. She had not seen him in 6 years. He had been 32 when she had refused him. He was 38 now. The lines at the corners of his eyes were new. The gray at his temples was new. The way he sat, as if he had learned, in some hard interval of his life, how to be still, was new. She thought, "What have you been doing for 6 years?" She thought, "I am not allowed to ask." He set down the bread. He said, "I came here on purpose. I know. I have been, for 2 years, wanting to come." "Then why did you not?" "Because I did not know what I would say." "And tonight?" "Tonight I still do not know what I will say. But the carriage broke. The storm came. And I am here. I will let the storm decide for me. If you turn me out, I will go. If you let me stay, I will tell you what I came to tell you. Before I leave." She set down her own teacup. She said, "Your Grace, if you have come to demand an explanation for what I did 6 years ago, I will not give you one. I have not given anyone one in 6 years. I will not start tonight." "I have not come for an explanation." "Then what?" he said very quietly. "I have come to apologize." The fire crackled. She did not move. She said, "For what?" "For believing it." "Believing what?" "All of it. Lady Hartfield. All of it. What you said in that ballroom. What every drawing room in London said about you for the year. After. What your own father said about you when he stopped speaking your name. I believed it. I believed it for 6 years. I went to Spain in the army for 2 of them because I could not be in the same country as a woman who had said those things to me. I came back 2 years ago. I have spent 2 years trying to understand, and I cannot understand it, Beatrice. I have looked at every part of what happened that night, and I cannot make it make sense. You were not cruel. You had never been cruel. You did not love my money. You had your own. You did not love anyone else. There was no one else. You stood up and you ruined yourself, in front of every person in London, and I have spent 6 years asking myself why." She closed her eyes. She said, "Your Grace, I have not finished. She opened her eyes. He said, I do not need to know why. I have come here to tell you that. I have come here to tell you that, whatever your reasons were, I no longer need them. I should never have needed them. I should have written to your father the next morning. I should have come to your door. I should have asked you once what had happened. I did none of those things. I let you carry it alone. I let London do what London did to you. And then I went to Spain. I am Lady Hartfield, I am. I am ashamed of the man I was at 32. I have come to tell you so. That is all. That is the only thing I came to tell you. I do not require anything in return. She was silent a long moment. She picked up her tea. She set it down again. She said, It is a strange thing to apologize to someone who has not asked for it. Yes. It is also a strange thing to apologize at midnight in a Yorkshire blizzard after 6 years of silence. Yes. You could not have done it by letter. He looked at her a long moment. He said, Beatrice, I did not come here only to apologize. That was the part I could say tonight. There is another part. I am not sure I can tell you tonight, but I will tell you before I leave. I would like, if it is permitted, to defer that part to tomorrow. What part? The part where I tell you what I have been doing for 6 years, not in Spain. In Spain I was a colonel. That is in the newspapers. The other part, the part the newspapers do not have, I have not told anyone, Beatrice. Not my mother, not my steward, not Lady Hartington. I will tell you. I will tell you tomorrow. I cannot put it in the same conversation as the apology. It is its own conversation. She looked at him. She said, You are frightening me, Adrian. It was the first time she had said his name. He did not this time react. He only said, I do not mean to frighten you. It is not bad. It is the opposite of bad. But it is mine, and I would like to tell you in daylight, after we have both slept. She stood up. She walked to the window. She drew back the heavy crimson drapery. The storm beyond the glass was a wall of white moving sideways. She could not see the drive. She could not see the south stable. She could not see her father's elm tree at the bottom of the lawn that she had climbed when she was 8. She said, with her back to him, Your Grace, you are very tired. So am I. I would like, if it is permitted, to defer this conversation until tomorrow. I am not certain I can carry it tonight. She did not turn around. She heard him stand. She heard him say very quietly, Of course, Lady Hartfield. She heard him walk to the door. She heard him stop. She heard him say, Beatrice. She did not turn around. Yes, I am glad you opened the door. She closed her eyes. She said, Go to bed, Your Grace. He went. She stood at the window for a long time after he was gone. The storm moved past her in white. She did not sleep. She watched the dawn arrive through the frosted glass of her bedroom window. The storm had not stopped. It had thickened. The sky was a flat gray white. The drifts had risen to the second sill of the kitchen window in the night. She got up at 6:30. She lit the kitchen fire. She made bread. She made it badly. Her father's cook had always made the bread. Beatrice had been baking for 11 weeks and was still not good at it, but she made it. At 8 o'clock she heard the Duke moving above her, in the small bedroom above the parlor. At 8:15 he came down. He was wearing yesterday's clothes. There had been nothing else, but he had washed and shaved with the water she had left outside his door. He came into the kitchen. He stopped in the doorway. He said, I did not think you would be here. Where else would I be? I assumed the village, or I do not know. I did not think here. She pulled the loaf out of the oven. It was lopsided. She put it on the table. She said, Your Grace, yesterday you said you had come to apologize, and you did not require anything in return. Today I am going to take you at your word. I will feed you, and I will keep you warm, and I will not ask you to make small talk. In return, I would like you to stay out of the kitchen and the second floor. You may use the parlor. You may use the library. It is across the front hall. You may use your bedroom. Everything else is mine. Is that agreed? He said, Beatrice, I cannot spend 3 days in this house and not speak to you. You may speak to me at meals. That is 2 hours a day. That is the agreement, Your Grace. Take it or ride out. He looked at her. He said, I will take it. She nodded. She handed him a piece of the lopsided bread. She said, Breakfast is in the parlor in 10 minutes. I will bring tea. Now, please leave my kitchen. He left her kitchen. He left her kitchen and he went into the library across the front hall and he stayed there for 6 hours. She knew he had stayed there because she heard nothing. No footsteps, no movement. Once, around noon, she heard a book being put back on a shelf. Once, around 2 o'clock, she heard him put another log on the fire. She brought him lunch on a tray. She set it on the library table. She did not speak. He did not speak. She left. At 4 o'clock, the light began to fail. She lit the candles in the parlor. She lit the candles in her own small bedroom. She put on the dark green wool dress her mother had loved. Not because she wanted to look well, but because the gray one was wet with kitchen water, and she had only the two suitable for downstairs. At 5:30, she walked to the library door. She knocked. He said, "Yes." She said through the door, "Supper is at 6, the parlor." She walked away. At 6 o'clock he came to the parlor. He was wearing yesterday's clothes still, but his cravat was tied differently, neater, more carefully, as if he had taken time over it, as if it had been the only thing in the house he could control. He stopped in the doorway when he saw her. He said, "You have changed your dress." "I had to. The kitchen ruined the other one." "It suits you." She felt her face heat. She said, "Sit down, Your Grace, and eat your stew before it goes cold. I cannot resti bear to be complimented by you across my own father's supper table. We are not friends. We will not pretend to be friends. Sit down." He sat down. He ate his stew. He did not compliment her again that meal, but he did not stop looking at her either. After supper, they did not part. It had not been agreed. It simply happened. She had sat down at her father's writing desk to balance the household accounts, a thing she had been meant to do for 3 weeks, and he had sat down in the chair across the fire with a book from the library. Neither of them had suggested it. Neither of them had announced it. They had simply both stayed in the parlor. For an hour she pretended to do the accounts. For an hour he pretended to read. She knew he was pretending because she watched him in her father's small writing desk mirror, the small oval glass propped on the desk, so that her father had been able to see who was approaching the front hall from his chair. And she saw twice that he had turned a page after 60 seconds. No one reads that slowly, and once when she lifted her pen, she saw him looking at her in the same mirror. She saw him see her, see him. She saw him look down. She set down her pen. She said, "Your Grace." He looked up. "Stop reading. You have not turned a page since the second log went on. Look at me." He closed the book. He looked at her. She turned in her chair to face him. She said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me as if we had no history at all, as if we were strangers, sitting in 2 chairs by a fire, in a storm we did not start. Will you?" "Yes." "Why did you come to Yorkshire?" He said, "I came to make peace with you, whatever shape peace looked like." "Why now?" "Because 2 weeks ago I was told you had buried your father, and I knew that I had run out of time to be a coward." "Told by whom?" "My cousin, Lady Hartington." "Who is your second cousin on your mother's side?" "Lady Hartington and I have not spoken in 5 years. She has, however, been watching you, from a distance. She had been waiting, she said, for me to ask. I asked her 2 weeks ago where you were. She told me. I came." Beatrice was silent a long moment. She said, "Were you afraid I had died too?" He flinched. "Yes, among other things, yes. And if I had? I do not know what I would have done. Beatrice, I do not allow myself to think it." She nodded. She turned back to her accounts. She said, without looking at him, "Tomorrow morning I will tell you why I did it, and then you can decide what to do with the rest of your life, but not tonight. Tonight I need to sleep, and so do you. Good night, Your Grace." She did not look up as he stood. She did not look up as he crossed the room. She did not look up as he stopped at her chair. 6 inches behind her, she could feel him there, and said very quietly, "Good night, Beatrice." She did not look up as he walked out. She did not look up until she heard his door close above her. Then she put her head down on the accounts book and she cried. She did not make him wait. She told him, before breakfast, in the parlor, while the kitchen kettle warmed for tea. She said, "Sit down, Your Grace. I am going to tell you what happened. I am only going to tell it once. I would like you to listen and not speak until I have finished. Do you agree?" He sat. He agreed. She said, 6 weeks before our engagement was announced, when I was 22, I overheard my father in his study with his man of business. He did not know I was in the next room. He had a habit of speaking too loudly when he was angry. I had come to ask him for a book. He had just been told that the Hartfield estate was in debt, not deeply, but meaningfully, enough that he would have to liquidate something. He had been told by the man of business that the simplest thing to liquidate was my dowry. My dowry was £40,000. Your estate at the time had £27,000 of obligations to my father, notes my grandfather had carried for your father. Your father had not been a careful man. My father said to his man of business that morning that the marriage would solve every problem. Take her dowry against his obligations and the books will be clear. He laughed. Your Grace, he was laughing, when he said that the most beautiful part of it was that you would never know, because the marriage settlements would be drawn up so that the cancellation of your father's debts would be embedded inside the larger transfer, invisible. You would believe you had married me. You would not understand that you had also been bought. He said, his exact words, Your Grace, the boy is proud. The boy will never accept the debts forgiven as a gift. So we will hide them inside the dowry and let him sleep at night. He laughed. I did not leave the next room. I sat down on the carpet outside his study door. I sat there for 3 hours. I tried to think of a way to tell you. I could not. If I told you, you would not marry me. You would refuse the dowry. You would lose Northwood. Your sisters would have no homes. Your mother was alive then, Your Grace. Your mother would die in lodgings. If I did not tell you, you would marry me and you would never know, and you would live the rest of your life as a man who had been bought without his consent. I could not do either thing. So I did the third thing. I refused the marriage, loudly, in public, with my own reputation as the cost, because once I had refused you in front of 300 witnesses, once I had called you grasping and cold and a fortune hunter, my father could no longer offer the marriage. The debts could no longer be wiped out in the settlements. You were free. You owed my father exactly what your father had owed him, £27,000, and not a farthing more. You could pay it on your own timeline, or refuse to pay it at all and call him a usurer in the Times, which is what I prayed every night for 2 years that you would do. You did not do that. You went to Spain. You paid down the debt over 6 years out of your own colonel's pay. I watched the columns in the Times. I knew when you paid each installment. I lit a candle in my room every time, like a fool. My father stopped speaking my name 3 days after the ball. My mother had been dead 2 years already. She did not have to see it. My sister Caroline wrote to me twice a year. Otherwise, Your Grace. Otherwise, I have not been spoken of by anyone in London in 6 years. Except as the woman who humiliated the Duke of Northwood, I have been the moral lesson at 1,000 drawing rooms. I have been the thing mothers say to their daughters to make them behave. I let them say it, because the alternative was that you would know. And if you knew, Your Grace, you would have refused the debt forgiveness. You would have lost the estate, and I could not be the woman who unmade you to spare myself. That is what happened. That is all of it. She stopped. She had not been looking at him. She had been looking at the fire. She looked at him now. The Duke of Northwood was sitting in her father's chair with his face in his hands. He was not making a sound, but his shoulders were shaking. She crossed the room. She knelt in front of him on the parlor rug. She put her hands, gently, the way one approaches a wounded animal, on his wrists. She drew his hands down from his face. His face was wet. She had not seen him cry at 28. She had not seen him cry at 32. She had not, she thought, seen any man cry in her life until this morning. She said, Adrian. She had not said his name in 6 years. Adrian, I am sorry. I am sorry that I let you hate me for 6 years. I should have written to you the morning you sailed for Spain. I should have written to you when you came home. I told myself I was protecting you. I was. But I was also hiding. And I am tired, Adrian. I am tired of being the woman in the story they tell wrong. He took her hands in both his. His hands were shaking. He said, Beatrice, I have to tell you the other thing now. I have to tell you before either of us is older. I cannot let you keep thinking what you have been thinking for 6 years. She looked at him. She said, What other thing? He drew a long breath. He said, I bought it back. She went still. She said, "What?" "Your dowry. I bought it back. From your father. 6 years. Out of my colonel's pay." The fire crackled. She did not move. She said very slowly, "Adrian, it is in trust, Beatrice, in your name. It has always been yours. I paid the last installment 3 weeks ago. The receipt arrived on the morning of your father's funeral, the funeral I did not attend, because I had not been told." She put a hand to her mouth. "I sacrificed myself for nothing. No, I have lived in disgrace for 6 years, for nothing. No, Beatrice, you lived in disgrace for 6 years because your father was a man who tried to do a wicked thing. You stopped him. The fact that I, after the fact, also tried to undo what he did, that does not undo what you did. You acted first. You acted alone. You acted not knowing whether I would ever be a man worthy of what you were costing yourself. And I have spent 6 years trying to be the man you were costing yourself for. I am still trying. I will keep trying. I am here this morning, Beatrice, in your father's chair, because I do not want to keep trying alone." She closed her eyes. He said, I do not deserve forgiveness, Beatrice. I deserve to be turned out of this house tonight for letting you carry it alone for 6 years. I am only telling you about the dowry because I cannot let you go one more hour believing your sacrifice was uncompensated. It is not enough. Money is never enough, but it is yours. It is the part I could give back." She opened her eyes. She pulled him out of her father's chair onto the parlor rug with her. She did not ask. She pulled him down to her level, to the rug where her dead father's terrier had slept for 14 years, to the place where she had been kneeling alone for 10 minutes. And she put her arms around his neck, and she put her face into his shoulder, and she stayed there. She had wanted for 6 years to be held by him. She had not known until this morning that she had been waiting for it. She did not move. He did not move. The fire burned down. The storm beyond the windows continued. Somewhere in the back of the house, a clock chimed 9. Neither of them noticed. The blizzard cleared on the afternoon of the 3rd day. They knew it had cleared because the wind dropped just past 2 o'clock, and the kitchen window, which had been white with driven snow for 48 hours, turned suddenly gray, then pale, then visible. The drifts in the yard were 6 feet deep. The sky above them was the color of old pewter. Adrian had been splitting kindling at the kitchen door since dawn, without being asked, with an axe he had found in the south stable, in his ruined coat. Beatrice had not stopped him. Beatrice had not, after the morning of the confession, stopped him from doing anything. They had not spoken much that day. There had not been a great deal left to say. At 3 o'clock she put on her father's old riding coat and her own thickest gloves, and she walked out to the south stable to check on his horse. She had not asked him to come. He came. The path from the house to the stable had been cleared. By him, she realized. He had been clearing it for 2 hours that morning, before she even came down, and they walked along it slowly. Their breath was visible. Their boots crunched in packed snow. Neither of them was looking at the other. She said, "The storm has cleared." "Yes." "You could ride out tomorrow." "Yes." She did not look at him. She said, "Will you?" A long silence. He said, "Lady Hartfield." "Adrian." "I do not, Beatrice, I do not know what to do." She stopped walking. She turned to face him. She did not lift her chin. She did not perform anything. She looked at him, in the cold afternoon light, in her father's old riding coat, with her breath visible between them. And she said very simply, "Adrian, I want you to stay." He went very still. She said, "I do not have a strategy. I do not have a plan. I am 28 years old. I have buried my father. I am alone in this house, and I want you to stay. That is all I know. That is all I have to give you. The rest of it, the village, London, the season, the people who have called me a liar for 6 years, I do not know how to undo any of that. I do not know if it can be undone. I only know that I do not want you to ride out tomorrow." He took a step toward her. He said, "Beatrice." "Yes." "Marry me." She closed her eyes. She said, "Yes." He took her face in both his hands. He kissed her, once, carefully. He rested his forehead against hers. He said, against her mouth, "I have a strategy." She laughed, surprised, into his mouth. "What?" "Stay until Friday. Mrs. Pickering comes. She tells the village. The village tells the post-coachman. The post-coachman tell London. By the time we arrive in London ourselves, in March, the story is already moving. We do not have to tell it. We only have to confirm it. We are seen together at every event of the season, side by side, hand in hand. And London will understand, slowly, over the course of 3 months, that they have been wrong about a woman for 6 years. That the Duke of Northwood was wrong about her too. That she is, in fact, the one I should have married 6 years ago and intend to marry now. She opened her eyes. She looked at him. She said, "You worked that out very quickly, Your Grace." "I have been working it out for 2 years, Beatrice. I have had a great deal of time." She put her arms around his neck. She said into his coat, "Took you long enough." He laughed. It was the first time, she thought, that she had ever heard him laugh. She thought, "I am going to hear that a great deal more." 3 weeks later, in the drawing room of the Duke of Northwood's London townhouse, Beatrice Hartfield received the 3rd bouquet of flowers she had received that morning. The first had been from her sister, Caroline. The second had been from Lady Hartington, Adrian's cousin, who had also written a 4-page letter that began, "I have been waiting 6 years to write this letter to you, and you must forgive me for the length of it," and which Beatrice had read twice, and then folded carefully into the back of her workbox, where she would keep it for the rest of her life. The 3rd bouquet was from Queen Charlotte. The card said only, "Lady Hartfield, we are pleased." Charlotte R. Beatrice laughed. Adrian, who had been reading the morning papers across the breakfast table, looked up. He said, "What?" She handed him the card. He read it. He said, "We are pleased. The Queen of England is pleased. Apparently. You have just been forgiven by the most powerful woman in the country. I have been acknowledged by the most powerful woman in the country. I have not been forgiven. I have not, Your Grace, done anything that requires forgiveness. I have been right for 6 years. I have just finally been told so in writing." He looked at her across the breakfast table. He set down the paper. He said, "Beatrice, yes, I love you. I know. I have loved you for 6 years. I know. I am going to be a good husband to you. I know that too, Adrian. I have always known. That is why I refused you in the first place." He laughed. She poured them both more tea. The 3rd bouquet sat between them on the table, a small, restrained, royally tasteful arrangement of white roses and dark green ivy. And the morning sun came through the tall London window, onto Beatrice's wine-red dress, and onto her hair, and onto the small gold ring Adrian had put on her hand at Hartfield Hall on the morning the storm cleared. She had stopped being the moral lesson. She had become, at 28 years old, after 6 years of carrying the truth alone, the woman the Queen of England had written a card to. It was, Beatrice thought, enough. It was more than enough. It was, in fact, exactly what she had been waiting for. If you have ever told a lie to spare someone you loved, if you have ever taken the punishment for a truth you could not afford to speak, if you have ever stood in a ballroom or a drawing room or a kitchen and let 300 people get you wrong because the alternative was worse, then you know what Beatrice knew, and you know what it costs. You are not alone in carrying it. You are not alone in having been the woman the room got wrong, and in the world of velvet and thorn, the eyesight always, in the end, finds its way. If this story moved you, if Beatrice's 6-year silence, or the morning Adrian wept in her father's chair, or the receipt that arrived on the day of the funeral he was not told about, found something in you, take a moment before you go to subscribe, turn on notifications, drop one word in the comments, the word that broke you open. We read every single one. There is a new story every 2 days. Each one is a candle. Each one is for you. The next candle is already lit.